All right, let's get started. So I'm going to spend the next, so by the way, there is a session today, which is mostly an introduction for the product is. There is a workshop on Friday where I'll actually going to be showing what the product looks like, build a couple of use cases and walk you through how the product is built and how to use it. I'm not going to do the demos today. I might touch upon a couple of them, but not really the demos. I'm just going to give you an overview of the product, and we will definitely go through the product itself in the demo sessions which we have on Friday. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are going to be here on Friday? Okay, I think we have a good quorum here. So, but I'll try to see if we do have time for the ones who are not going to be here, very quick glimpse of what the product looks like. But I'm more than happy to show it to you later, and we also have a booth out there where they are already demoing the product, so you can have a glimpse of the product there as well. So GALE has been, as I said, in the making for the past few months, and there is a lot of history about why we started thinking about building GALE. It all started, obviously, if you look at the world today, like the AD and the BC, I think we have before ChatGPT and after ChatGPT. I think the world after ChatGPT has changed a lot of things. In fact, from our perspective as well, as we've been building natural language processing models for a long time in our history, we realized that there was a significant change that we need to make. And we needed a way to kind of start figuring out how do we experiment with various different models that are coming into play, what is the impact of that from an enterprise perspective. And while we were doing that, we started building a list of small tools across the company, because we wanted to figure out how to fine tune these models for our products, how do we combine them, create workflows, so on and so forth. And that's when we realized that all of these small tools that we have, we can combine them and create a product, because we needed that, and eventually realized that enterprises would also need it. And hence the journey of GALE began. I think now we are at a point where we are happy to make a very bold statement that this is a product that can help you build GenAI agents faster. And there are reasons why we think this is appropriate, and there are multiple different small set of tools we provide to make this happen. But to explain what that is, I just want to talk about some things that are obvious, but still worth mentioning. What is GenAI, at least from a perspective of how we think about it, and what are GenAI agents? Because those are the building blocks of what GALE is. And I'm going to very briefly talk about those, and then we'll go into the details of the product itself. We've all used GenAI models. Again, I'm sure all of you guys are experimenting with it. These GenAI models are obviously different from the earlier AI models for multiple different reasons. But what is a GenAI model? At the end of the day, it takes a simple input, what we all call it as prompt, and then it generates some kind of output. And this generated output is completely brand new and apparently unique. And because of its ability for it to transform some kind of a prompt into a completely new content, generating a new content, it gets the name Generative AI. No surprises there. But the power of these models don't stop there. I mean, these kind of models existed before as well. There was nothing special about that. But the power of these models, especially the one built on the transformer architecture, it has the ability to transform information in one kind of a modality to a completely different kind of modality. So for example, when you think about providing some kind of a text prompt, now not only would you get a text prompt out of it, you can get an image, you can get a video, you can get an audio, and the ability for it to transform based on the information you provide to these models makes it extremely powerful. That's one side of the equation. It's not only about the output, but also the ability for you to provide different kind of modalities as an input. So for example, I can give an image, ask it to generate a new image out of that. It's possible. I can give an audio file, ask it to generate a summary out of that, where it will transcribe, create a text, and create a summary out of it. That's possible. The ability of these models for you to take any kind of modality and create a completely brand new kind of modality out of it is extremely powerful. And when you start thinking about this and say, okay, there are plenty of use cases within the organization where I can start playing around with these kind of models and create significant opportunities in terms of productivity increases, bottom line opportunities, top line opportunities, and there are a lot of use cases across your business value chain you can start thinking about applying these models to. Now, obviously, when this came across, when the ChatGPT, especially when the OpenAI started releasing APIs, it was very easy for everybody to start creating content out of that. It was an API. The heavy lifting was done by the model behind the scenes. So once you got the API in, people started create simple apps. I could send out an email, ask it to generate a summary. I could send out a specific prompt to a model, ask it to generate an image. So people started creating these kind of small applications when the APIs was available, and they started using that within their enterprises. Initially, it was all for fun. They started creating poems and random images, but eventually they started applying this to the enterprise use cases. But they were all simple, focused applications that you could use the model out of the box as is with the APIs, and you got the output out of it. Now, creating these kind of experiments are extremely easy right now, because all you have to do is one API called OpenAI, and you get all of these pieces of information. But when you start thinking about converting this into an agent, which actually does a complex workflow end to end and takes certain parts of your entire enterprise processes and optimizes that, there is a lot of other things that needs to go into creating these agents. And out of many, I want to talk about 3 important ingredients that's important. Okay. The first of them, I think I'm clicking the wrong button. That's better. The first of the ingredient that needs to go into, obviously, is thinking about which model to use. When the ChatGPT came in and OpenAI came up with their APIs, it was very simple. There was one model, and suddenly after that, Meta came up with Llama, and then open source, the ecosystem started to explode. Today, we have very powerful open source models that perform in given specific task as powerful as 3.5 and GPT-4s. Now you have Anthropic coming up with their models, Google finally released their models. So there is a plethora of models available out there, and every model does most of the jobs properly, but for specific tasks, you may want to figure out which model is the right one. And there are multiple parameters upon which you want to evaluate that. First is how well is it performing? Second is what's the latency? Third is it is actually generating and following the instructions that I'm asking it to. So there is a need for you to experiment with these models to figure out which one makes sense for a given specific task. The second is the ability for you to connect to the enterprise data. Now, all of these, given an input, generating an output is great, but if you want to bring it to the enterprise world, obviously it needs to connect to your source of truth and then extract out information and act on those information. That means you have to have the ability to seamlessly connect to your enterprises, bring that piece of information, make that part of the workflow. Then the moment enterprise data comes into play, the important ingredient there is how do I ensure the information that I have within the enterprise is not leaked to the models, especially if it's commercial models sitting out there somewhere in the cloud. So then guardrails come into play. How do you make sure these models behave based on the boundary conditions you've already defined for the models, and they do not breach those boundary conditions? So that's something you have to think about when you start building GenAI agents. The third is it's very easy, as I was explaining, to create quick apps when you start using the APIs, but you have to stitch something together and iterate over multiple times using a combination of models for you to get a certain type of use cases from an enterprise perspective done. You need a faster way to stitch these pieces together. I have to have the ability for me to extract out data from an API. I have to have the ability to say, let's fine-tune a model and combine the fine-tuned model along with probably a GPT-4 model and then create a comprehensive workflow. But I know it's never right the first time. How quickly can I iterate over? And the entire objective of how do I get from idea to production very, very quickly. So then this is what we call GenAI agents. When you start stitching all of these pieces together, when one input is transformed across various different stages, extracting out the data, probably transforming it with one particular model, then ensuring that the model is protected with the respective guardrails, and then probably pushing the data to some other particular system which is necessary, and you stitch all of these pieces together, then it's not about one particular node accessing the information from OpenAI, but it's a combination of these kind of nodes that eventually takes a particular use case or a task you currently have and improves the productivity, improves the experience of the end users that a particular task is being applied to. Now, if you look at the value chain of an organization broadly from a perspective of product development all the way to customer support and business support, there are plenty of opportunities that are out there where obviously GenAI can be applied. I'm sure you guys have already been thinking about it. We've been looking at these as examples for us to think through where we want to apply, what kind of use cases we want to look into, and broadly we looked at 4 different categories. Raj touched upon that today, Prasanna did as well. I'm very briefly going to touch upon those. The first is potential research. In fact, we've been applying this. Most of the use cases that I'm going to talk about, we've been applying it already internally and probably show you some examples later as well. So research, especially if you want to do some kind of a research based from the internet, if you want to go extract out piece of information from various different sources, collate that, create a report. If you want to create a report every 15 days and there is information coming from various different sources, you can create GenAI agents that actually does this. In fact, we've been working on an internal tool where we are trying to figure out if we have a prospect that we want to go and talk to, then how do we do the research about that particular prospect using these agents that does all of these pieces of information and provides the first source of report to the business development executive saying, well, here is what it is. Now you go back and figure out if this makes sense and you want to research further. So research is definitely an area where GenAI can be applied to. Then it's about, am I standing in the way? I think I am. Now I realize it. My apologies. The second, I think most places where I think people have already been doing research on is the document analysis and summarization. That's a no-brainer for an enterprise because every enterprise probably have plethora of documents built over decades, and you have nuggets of gold hidden in these documents, and you want to extract those pieces of information, extract out summaries from that, probably find the right kind of answers. So there is a lot of experimentation being done in terms of document analysis and summarization, finding answers, analyzing feedback that's coming in unstructured ways, whether it is coming from, let's say, social media, whether it's coming from some kind of a forum that you want to extract out and find meaning from there, and also figure out which of those particular comments do you want to respond to, which one of them do you want to really focus on. So all of these can be actually created as GenAI agents within GALE, and you can transform them and extract out certain kind of reports that generate out of this. When you think about Search AI, the product that we've been talking about, which is the entire RAG implementation, Q&A, especially natural language Q&A, is something that people have been experimenting extensively, we know, and with certain type of benefits, there is obviously significant amount of work that needs to be done, but that's an area where most people are been focusing on. The third one, this is where everything began with OpenAI. In fact, when people started using ChatGPT, it's about, well, can I create my blog content? Can I create my email content? And it started there, but eventually it started pushing towards, can I generate an entire workflow where my blog content or my online social media content gets generated on a regular basis, maybe once a week, maybe once in a fortnight, automatically without me having to go and say, ChatGPT, give me this, and I copy paste that into a blog post and then publish it. So there is a significant amount of work that's gone into in terms of marketing. There is also, if you think about sales and support, there is emails that's been generated. In fact, email automation was one of the examples that we've actually built for one of our customers, where we have taken an email that's come in, we process that email, identify the sentiment of it, identify what exactly the intent of that particular use case is, and then automatically figure out a response and then send the response out to a human who can take a look at that and say if this particular response makes sense, and then they send it to the customers. One other example that we're working on is a customer is RFPs. They respond to RFPs pretty much once or twice a month. And there is a significant amount of content that goes into the RFPs that's already been documented historically. And they typically end up spending time extracting that information and retyping that into the new RFP. And they wanted us to figure out if there is a way for us to extract these pieces of information based on the questions in the new RFP and automatically create a response that could again be sent to somebody human in the loop who can evaluate that and then respond. And then one of the most important areas is the process workflows. There are a lot of workflows across the organization, whether it is about, let's say, in terms of insurance claims processing, whether it's about banking KYC, lead generation evaluation, automatic email generation. You can think about one of the thumb rules that I have is if you have gone through the process of RPA, you can pretty much think about those examples and now put them on steroids with GenAI. And that is where really everything in terms of the use cases that have gone through RPA stage can be used to optimize your processes much better with generative AI and definitely with GALE. Just a few sample examples, but the point I'm trying to make here is that across the value chain of your organization, there are plenty of opportunities where obviously these can come into play. So once you identify this, the objective is, the way we thought about building GALE is not to create specific products for each one of them. You can go and say, I'll buy a product for email generation. You can go and say, I'll buy a product for blog content generation. But the objective of us building this platform was that you could pull these pieces out and then power them up with the GenAI models and essentially plug them back into your existing systems and processes with API calls. And that was the point. We know that every enterprise already have systems in place, already have processes in place, and it's important for us to optimize and automate that without disrupting anything you currently have, and then essentially bring that within GALE, and you don't have to buy 20 different applications to make that happen, but essentially create processes here and then plug them back directly as it is, so your existing systems and processes don't get disrupted, but that definitely get productivity boost with these models. So if you have to build everything from scratch, especially from an agent perspective, when you have to think about that I have an idea, then I can use any of these models, build a quick experiment, fine, but I want to push this to production and make it scalable for hundreds and thousands of users. What does it actually take? Essentially, if you start thinking about the entire experience, I mean, this is typically any kind of product development. You have an idea, and that idea has to go through an experimentation stage. And from the experimentation, you will have to build so that it is sustainable and scalable. And eventually, you have to serve this for a large number of users, depending on the number of users you have within the enterprise. And that has to be enabled with scaling capabilities that if it's 1,000 users today, 10,000 tomorrow, you don't have to do anything much to make that happen. And finally, the output of that is hopefully enhanced experience and also an improved productivity. If you break this down, there are various different activities that needs to happen in each one of them, right? Especially from an experiment and the build stage, there are certain aspects of activities. When you think about serving, it's a totally different set of activities that needs to happen. And I'll just touch upon a few of them. Most of you guys know what these are, but I just want to very quickly highlight them. The first one is engineering the right kind of prompt. Today, the spec for your model is the prompt. And if you want to get the right kind of prompt, depending on the type of model, you have to figure out what prompt makes sense and then ensure that the model is responding to that prompt appropriately. And it's not one time done. You have to experiment this multiple times and also see between model A and model B, does the same prompt work? Do I have to change that? Do I have to instruct a different model with different kind of instructions? So there is a bit of experimentation that needs to happen alongside that. Then you have to see, especially if you have a combination of open source and commercial models, and depending on the objective, the amount of money you have to spend, you have to figure out which models to use for what kind of activity. Do I have to use OpenAI for all the scenarios? Probably not. Otherwise, the check at the end of the month is going to be pretty high. So you may want to figure out maybe there are smaller models that can do the job better. Maybe we have to fine tune a model, and that exploration has to be done before you make a decision of what need to do. Then once that's done, when you go to the build stage, you may have created these small workflows, but you have to make these workflows production ready. That means they have to ensure that there's a good architecture behind it. You have to ensure that it is able to sustain all the different kind of information that actually comes in. There is stability, there is obviously uptime. All of that is something that you have to think through in starting to build this. The guardrails piece I talked about earlier. So depending on your use case, and depending on which model you're using, especially if the models are hosted outside of your ecosystem, then you have to ensure what kind of information can I enable the models to see and what kind of information I should not enable the models to see. And we'll talk about guardrails a little bit later, but that is definitely for you have to consider when it comes to enterprise context. Then the serving is a totally different ball game altogether. Enabling auto scaling is a significant amount of challenge. How do you serve these models? How do you ensure that the models are responding appropriately with a minimum amount of latency across various different type of requests that comes in, across various different applications that you actually develop? Especially if you're starting to use them in mission critical applications, this scaling and its ability to be responding all the time and availability of these models becomes very important. And finally, these models, when you start thinking about them, the tokens seems easy and simple initially, but they're very difficult to and complicated to evaluate. You have to understand at every stage, whenever you execute a comprehensive workflow, what's happening step by step, what kind of prompt went into the model, how much tokens did it actually consume, and how do you trace the entire agent execution step by step to make sure that what's happening, if you want to debug, if you want to analyze, if you want to take a look at it as a dashboard. So now from a perspective of IT, from a perspective of business and operations, how do you get these information out and how do you ensure that there are dashboards associated with it? So there is a significant amount of work that needs to go into making an idea come to life into production. And if you kind of take this piece and plot this, the amount of time, especially the creative time, is way up on the left of this particular workflow. You spend a lot of time thinking about what use case to use and how do we enable productivity for your employees and for your customers. And there's a lot of thinking and creativity that needs to go in during the experimentation stage and during the build stage. But as you go through the serve stage, really there is no creativity. It's all about ensuring that the same thing is repeated again and again across various different applications. So if you plot the same thing against repeatability, then repeatability is significantly high on the right side. On the left side, creativity is significantly high. The promise of GALE is that we want to help you focus on this by completely automating the right side of the equation, by ensuring that the amount of tools that are necessary, that once you have finished the experimentation, the creativity that needs to go into that, build the flow, all you have to think about is clicking once and say deploy, and everything that's necessary for you to scale this for thousands of users comes behind the scenes based on our decades of experience of layering all of this for enterprise grade. So now in the morning, I think Prasanna kind of talked about the building blocks of GALE. I'm going to touch upon that briefly, and then it starts with obviously your data. There are multiple layers of GALE. Everything is built on your systems, your data, you bring that in, and then you're trying to optimize for the performance of that particular piece of use cases and tasks you have within your organization. On top of that sits the data connectors. I mean, obviously within GALE, if you want to connect to your enterprise systems, you have to have the ability for you to connect to them with API nodes, so you can connect to any APIs. We're also building several data connectors. So for example, if you have a CRM system that is typically used out of the shelf, we want to be able to directly connect to them with pre-built data connectors, so you don't have to kind of configure them from the ground up. There are data connectors already available in the platform. We're going to start leveraging them, but this is going to be a continuous process of updating this as and when we see the need for you to connect to various different systems. So once you have the connectors, on top of that sits the foundational model. Now, we support pretty much all commercial models today. We also support plenty of open source models. I'll talk about that in a second. But the foundation for GenAI agents are these models. You bring them in, and then you start that as a basis upon which you actually build the agents. Now, these models can be used as is, but you can make them your own by bringing your enterprise data and say, look, in this particular scenario, the model works very well, but it's taking too much time, it's taking too much money. I want a smaller model that can run faster and probably cost me lesser. In that particular scenario, you can bring your enterprise data, use any of the open source models and fine tune them. It's a very simple process of fine tuning. Most of your hard work will grow into curating the data necessary for the fine tuning rather than the fine tuning process itself. Then comes your agents, and excuse me for a second. So we've also simplified agent building experience by providing a lot of tools around it. Ability for you to experiment with prompts. We have something called a prompt playground where you can experiment with one prompt and compare that against multiple models at the same time. You can also experiment with multiple prompts and multiple models at the same time. And what we enable there is for you to see whether a given prompt or a combination of prompts, how does it compare against a Mistral model versus GPT-4 versus a Claude 2.1. Now, if you have a fine-tuned model, you can compare that as well. Alongside, we provide various different type of information such as latency, how long did it take for you to respond, and we are also building auto evaluation of these responses. So what we are trying to do is, if you compare three models, we are coming up with a mechanism where we can do a relative evaluation of saying out of the three models, which one actually responded better given the particular prompt. That's going to be ready definitely for GA. It's not in beta. The heavy lifting is actually on the LLM ops side, where everything that we built with the platform for the last 10 years, we are bringing that into GALE because everything that we are building on GALE is built on the platform itself. And this is what will enable us to actually completely eliminate the amount of effort you have to do in terms of serving these simple experiments you do into production grade multi-user usage. Well, GALE is part of Kore, and it lives with the Kore stack. Search AI, which is the entire RAG experience that you can build, can be directly integrated with Kore, with GALE, excuse me. So you will have a Search AI node that you can drop in within GALE, and anything you've ingested in terms of the documentation within Search AI can directly come here. So you can make sure that there is a query that's going in. It does evaluation and extraction of information across thousands of documents. That information comes in, and then you actually go through the process of the rest of the steps you want to build within GALE. What you build in GALE can be then used within platform as well. So for example, if you have a chatbot that's going back and forth with a customer, let's say with an insurance client, and then at some point you want to evaluate if this particular insurance can be done through a straight-through processing. And if you want to build a simple GALE flow with that, you can do. And then we are building a GALE node within the platform where you can drop the GALE node and say use this particular agent, and that agent gets triggered in between the chatbot conversation, thereby executing this completely behind the scenes and getting the output. Now, we expose all of this as an API. One of the things, there are actually two decisions we made as a foundational principle when you're starting to think about GALE. First, we decided not to build foundational models. Initially, we had that idea. That was way back, but then we decided not to build foundational models for obvious reasons, because we realized that the open source market is exploding and the foundational models are already going to be plenty in the market, and there was no need for us to build anything. Fine tuning on top of that was the right way to go. The second assumptions, and as a principle we did, was we didn't want to build an application. We wanted to give you an ability for you to build something and create an API out of that without an interface, because you already have systems and you want to consume that information through APIs into those systems. So everything you build in GALE, when you deploy that, you get an API, very similar to anything that you need an API key along with it, and you can start using that within your enterprise systems. We have plenty of core solutions already, and we're going to start building GALE solutions specifically for domains as well. And what you build in GALE, today what we have in core solutions, will also eventually start using them. Whether it's a model that's been built within GALE, whether it's a workflow agent that's been built within GALE, you can use them and then finally make sure the users are using the solutions directly. So your systems can consume that, or your users can consume that, or you can get something out of GALE, build an interface on top of it, and have your users consume it. So it's kind of pretty flexible in terms of how we architect this. So I want to, in that particular block diagram, there were multiple things. I want to highlight three pieces. One is the models themselves. As I said, we actually support pretty much all commercial models, so we continue to expand on this. We already have support for Claude 3 Opus in the platform, and we're going to, obviously, whenever new models get dropped, we are evaluating that and immediately publishing that on the platform. We support about 30 plus models on the open source right now. We have a full team that evaluates all the open source models that actually come in, make sure we figure out what open source models are working well, what kind of use cases. We have an evaluation framework, and after that's done, we start providing that as a model available on the platform that you can start using. But we know some of our evaluation metrics and the way we evaluate may not be right for you. So we also enable you to directly integrate with Hugging Face and bring any kind of Hugging Face model directly into the platform, as long as it's a transformer model today. And our objective is to go beyond the transformer models and enable you to bring traditional AI models as well. So for example, if you have a predictive AI model that you have built for whatever reasons historically, you will be able to bring that within the GALE workflow and embed that as part of the GALE workflow. And that is something we're working on. We will enable that pretty soon. Now that's about the models. Now, when you start thinking about models, the next question is, what do you do in terms of fine tuning? That was the bucket I was talking about. Fine tuning has two key pieces. One is you have to get the right kind of data. You have to extract out the piece of information, curate the data so that you understand there is an input and there is an output, and you have to curate that particular piece of data. That you need to do. Once you have the data curated, the next step is for you to actually fine tune it. And we have simplified the entire fine tuning process. It's a 4 or 5 step process where you select the base model you want to fine tune on, you choose the data set you want to fine tune it on, and then once you have decided the data set, you go through you decide the hardware you want to fine tune it on, and then also you give it the evaluation data set for the model. Once it is fine tuned, what it has to be tested on. Once you go through this process, the model goes into the fine tuning, and then you get the output. We're also working on enabling you to do evaluations of the model that has been created, fine tuned. Currently, we are doing evaluations using AI feedback. I'll show you some examples of what's happened. But eventually, we will also enable you to start doing human feedback evaluation of the models, either via comparing multiple responses and re-ranking them, or having a comprehensive set of parameters upon which you want to evaluate that, and you have a red team that actually evaluates the model responses and then says, this is the right kind of response, or this is working or not working, and use that as an update to the model itself. So I want to very briefly touch upon our experience of fine-tuning and what we have done, and I'll show you a couple of examples of how where fine-tuning has really worked for us. So this one is something we've been working on. So here is the conversation between a user and a bot. Very briefly, it's talking about the booking a flight, and the conversation goes on saying, what's happening in terms of, this is the days we want to forget, the COVID days, where people had an issue in terms of saying, well, is it safe for me to actually fly on a flight? Now, what you have there on the right-hand side is the golden answer. This is what we would ideally want the bot to respond as. Now, how do we compare different models in terms of response? Now, what we started to do was, well, if this is a golden answer, if you give a particular prompt and this bot agent conversation, what will OpenAI respond as? So we started with that. I said, okay, OpenAI responds fantastically, and it's close to our golden answer, and it took about 2.7 seconds, so we started evaluating how long it actually takes to respond, and that was good. But obviously, this is OpenAI. If you have to send a full conversation about the bot and the agent, the number of tokens and the cost, all of that is a consideration. Then we said, okay, let's take a look at what happens if you use an open source foundational model, Mistral being one of the best ones that we've been using recently. Mistral responded okay. It does follow instructions, but there is an issue sometimes, and it truncates the responses. In this particular scenario, there was a problem. We tested across multiple one of them. This one, as an example, I actually took, it did not even complete the response, but it was faster, right? That was something for us to think through. Okay, latency is the consideration or the accuracy. Then we decided to actually go back and look at some of the data sets we had, and we fine-tuned this entire set of data, and we wanted to compare this against a fine-tuned model. Then we had a Mistral fine-tune where the response was close enough to GPT, and the latency was significantly lower. Obviously, when you start thinking about this, in this particular scenario, we didn't want complicated models. What we wanted was the model that can quickly take a look at the response the bot was thinking about and rephrase it. And if you're able to do that cheaper and faster, then that's exactly what we're looking for. So we did this across various different prompts, and we had some interesting results. What you see here is basically we evaluated the responses between the Mistral vanilla, the ExoGPT, which is our fine-tuned model, and as well as the GPT-4 itself, and on context adherence, toxicity, correctness, etc. And also we looked at it from a perspective of response times. In this particular scenario, and by the way, this is not by any means the standard for everything. In this particular scenario, we realized that this actually makes sense. And this experimentation is extremely important for you to figure out, do we need to fine-tune a model for a specific use case? And if you do, can that actually work better? And once you figure that out, maybe when you put that back into the workflow, your costs go down, your inference times goes up, which is actually a good thing at the end of the day. Now, that's about model fine-tuning. Then when it comes to agents, there are multiple pieces we're actually thinking about. One, how do we enable you to write better prompts? Prompts for different models are different. So we want to make sure that we provide you capabilities where you can write a prompt, and we can use other models to evaluate if this particular prompt is right for a given context. Sometimes we write the prompt very lazily, and we want to use these models to help you rewrite the prompt in a way the model would have to use it, with the right kind of instructions, with the right kind of persona for the particular model, clear definition of what kind of output the model should be generating. So we enable writing these prompts automatically behind the scenes. Most of the prompts, for example, if you think about summarization, if you think about generation of JSON, there are predefined set of prompts that we've been working on in various different examples and experiments we've been doing. So we're collating that, and we're creating a prompt library that will make that available within GALE, where you can go and choose this prompt library and say, this is a good starting point for me. I use that as a basis, and then I can update that if necessary. So if you want to do a good summarization based on a given context, we have a prompt that actually helps you do that. And that is what we are trying to do is each of these prompts, we're evaluating against multiple models, and we will let you know which model this particular prompt works very well, and that will be available as part of information for you to look into and start. Instead of starting from scratch, you can start from there. I talked about this earlier. In the prompt playground enables you to do multi-prompt, multi-model experimentation. On Friday, I will show you the demo of that, where you can, you can bring in a particular combination of prompts as a part of CSV, upload that, select various different models you have configured, and then see how the output results look like. Then the heart of GALE, apart from the fine-tuning the model, is the ability for you to create AI agents. And keeping in DNA with what Kore is, in terms of creating a no-code builder, we have ensured that the same concept and capabilities are extended back into GALE as well. We have various different type of nodes. You have the AI node, that you can configure with different AI models, API node, extracting out information. We support function nodes. The difference between platform and GALE is we support JavaScript as well as Python for you to code custom functions if at all necessary. And then we have the ability for you to do logics behind the scenes and then extract and deploy all of these. So the entire concept of no code builder, again, during the demo, we'll talk about it. We have a debugger inbuilt into the no code builder. So when you define a particular flow and say that you have to define the input and the output parameters, that becomes your API contract. You get that piece of information and then you provide the input, and you will be able to navigate every step of the execution. And I will show later on Friday again. I'm promising too many things for Friday. I will show you that, and essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about every node. When you go in, you will be able to see what prompt went into the model, what prompt came out of the model, how long did it take, how many prompts, how many tokens did it actually consume, so you can go through and evaluate everything within the flow directly there. So coming back to this particular slide, where we said from idea to enhanced experience, there is a lot of different steps that you need to do. And building all the different capabilities within GALE, we believe that you can combine experiment and build stage together and bring that down for less than 40% of the time you would actually take in terms of making this happen. But the most important thing is the entire part of serving is inbuilt into the platform. So once you finish this piece of information, you can directly deploy to hundreds of users instantly using the capabilities that we have. I've got 10 minutes. So from idea to production, based on the experiments we have done internally, we believe that it's going to be reduced at least by 40%, if not more. I'm going to show you one video that we've been building internally. This is for the, as I told you, I think earlier about the business development workflow. So when we are trying to work with a new prospect, we spend a significant amount of time doing the research on that particular prospect, identifying what the company does, what are the different kind of capabilities they have, who are the decision makers in that particular organization, and there is a comprehensive report that's created out of that. So the business development executives look at this report, and then they start doing the conversations with them. They send out emails, they send out LinkedIn messages, they call them, have a conversation with the customers. So what we wanted to do was, once this report is created, we actually uploaded that report into Search Assist, which is our RAG generation. And then we said, okay, now can we create a GALE flow where if I tell which customer I want to talk to, what is the product I want to associate and actually sell to that particular prospect? Can we generate an email guidebook, email automatically, a call guidebook about how to let this particular person, when they call them, what are the different points to highlight and make it extremely personalized to the individual that you're talking to, and then also an automatic in-mail for LinkedIn. So this is the interface of, it's not GALE, but it is using the GALE API for the flow that's been built. The prospect is taken, there is a user, there is a particular product that we are looking into, and then once it goes in, now it's generating the full content of the call response. This is the guidebook for the individuals to actually say, these are the points you want to think about for this particular individual to talk to. There is a full email that's generated, and there is a full LinkedIn response that's generated. Now, obviously, we're not going to send this out directly to the customers, but there is a human in the loop. But the amount of time they have to do in terms of extracting out various different parts of information and then trying to compose this appropriately every time is being something that we've automated. We are already starting to put in some kind of a guidelines here saying, okay, this is the golden answer, the golden email that we want to always refer to. When you generate this, make sure you evaluate against that and tell me how good this particular content you've generated is. Once that comes in, it can go to these individual users and say, okay, this is what you have, and then they can decide if they want to edit it and send it, or they want to send it directly. At some point in time in the future, maybe it will happen automatically, but today there will definitely be human in the loop. So finally, here is a QR code for you guys to sign up to beta. Thank you for coming, but we are very, very excited to launch this application on beta stage. We're looking forward to hear from you and see what kind of feedback you may have and what are the use cases you may come up with. With that, thank you very much.